doesn't have to speak after the slideshow. It's always tricky to try to get it together after all those amazing pictures, so thank you for bearing with me. One line from that play that some of you put on last week, Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, that has stayed in my mind is not a famous line or a particularly famous line, and it wouldn't make the top 10 of any top 10 lines from Death of a Salesman. But it stayed in my mind nonetheless, and it's from Linda, Willie's wife. She says to her two boys at one point, in real desperation, she says, "Attention must be paid. Attention! Attention must be finally paid." See, it's a simple line, but it stayed with me. And Linda goes on just after that to say, "A terrible thing is happening." And for today, I'd switch that up for you graduates. I'd say, "Attention must be finally paid. A really beautiful thing is happening." So with that line in mind, I'd like to ask you to do something that I've wanted to do at graduation for a while, but haven't. Something that Mr. Temple actually started. I would like for the seniors just to stand up in silence and to turn around and take a look in silence. Stand up. Go ahead and take a look. Pay attention. Pay attention to all the people who are here for you, who believe in you, who love you. Pay attention. And you know, if you'd like, seniors, you might even cheer for them now because they'll cheer for you later. Take it in. Okay, and you can sit back down. Thanks for trying that out. Attention must be paid. And if you pay attention properly, I hope you feel gratitude, real deep gratitude, for all those people out there who brought you to this point and all that they've done to bring you to this point. We all stand on many shoulders to reach the heights of today, and attention must be paid. And I'd also ask that you just take a moment in your mind to bring to mind those folks who aren't here, the people who, for whatever reason, could not be here, but who are part of you. And just for a moment, just to yourself, if you just bring them to mind. Thank you. Now we can begin. I always get a good bit of advice each year about what to say at graduation. One piece of advice that I got this past week, and I've gotten it many, many times before, is this: don't worry, nobody will remember a single thing about what you say. And we get a lot of it. We often get advice like that, don't we? Unsolicited, very well intentioned, but ultimately missing the mark. Because I just doesn't exactly inspire me to come up with a speech if I know you're not going to remember a single thing. And you see, I who have really no memory, I do remember the speech at my own graduation, or at least a part of it. You see, at my graduation, my best friend Alan, whom we called Big Al, Big Al had been selected by our class to be the student choice speaker. We had a valedictorian. We had one of those, and he was not that person. But we chose Big Al, and Big Al was someone who always pushed the limits on just about everything, and his speech was true to form. He had all of these inside jokes embedded into his speech. The speech made perfect sense, just fine sense to the adult audience. But to us, there were all these inside jokes and secret meanings that only we knew about. And we just laughed and laughed. And by the time the adult speaker came up, the famous person from the outside speaker, we were still giggling, still poking at each other saying, "Can you believe Big Al said that?" And I'm embarrassed to say that we did not give our full undivided to the guest speaker. But that did not last long. because the outside speaker came up to the podium and he yanked us to attention. At the podium, he stood and he said, "Children!" And that was the first thing that pulled us his way. For one, it was very loud. For two, when you're 17 or 18 years old, it gets your attention when someone calls you children. It brings out a little of that, who are you calling children? But it was the next line that I remember. He said, "Children, you are going to die." And that for sure got our attention. And the rest of his speech, which in fact I don't exactly remember, was charging us to seize the day. Carpe diem. In a less directly morbid way, I'd like to riff off of that theme by recalling a story I heard earlier this year. The story involves a kid, we'll call him Alfred, who grew up wanting more than anything to be a successful businessman and to be rich. His father had been a businessman and had great success in business, but had also stumbled and had gone bankrupt. And Alfred wanted to be perfect, and he wanted to be perfectly successful. And successful he was by many, many measures. He claimed many inventions, and he amassed a fortune all to himself. He also came to find himself very lonely at midlife. And it was at that time that his own brother died while still young. The next day after his dear brother had died, Alfred experienced something that few other people had. He woke up to his morning newspaper, and there he read his own obituary. You see, a French newspaper mistakenly thought that Alfred had died, and they printed his obituary, not his brother's. And it was not a kind obituary. See, many of Alfred's inventions involved finding new ways to blow things up. They were explosives, and they could be used in mining and engineering, and they could be used and were used in war. So the obituary that Alfred read that morning said, "Le marchand de la mort est mort." The merchant of death is dead. And it went on to say, "He who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before died yesterday." And this changed Alfred's life. He experienced an existential crisis and transformation, an extended dark night of the soul. But it was not a change that he outwardly expressed or told people about, in part because he had no one close enough to tell it to. The change within him was expressed years later at his own death when his last will and testament was opened. Then it was discovered that Alfred's huge fortune, almost all of his money, was set aside to establish prizes that would affirm humanity and honor peace. And today we still have and celebrate the Alfred Nobel Prizes for literature and medicine and science, and most notably the Alfred Nobel Prize for Peace. Well, what about the rest of us? What about the rest of us who don't have that inconvenient privilege of reading our obituary as we chomp on our morning cereal? Our great American author, Ernest Hemingway, he was in a small plane crash in Africa, and it was falsely reported that he had died. Hemingway is said to have sat at his breakfast table every morning after that with a scrapbook of his obituaries, rereading them while drinking a glass of champagne. And what about us who have no such scrapbook? How do we stay fully alive while we're alive? How do we carpe the diem? How do we seize the day? That's in part what Thoreau was talking about last year when we read in Walden, when he was talking about being fully awake. He says we must learn to reawaken ourselves and keep ourselves awake. Thoreau admits that he never yet met the person who was fully awake. And he says humbly, how could I have looked him in the face? How do we stay fully alive while we're alive? Well, I don't know the answer. I do know that that is what your class has done for our school. You have kept us more fully awake, more fully alive. I think that's part of what we do in this collective commitment to each other that we call community. The line from the musician Graham Nash comes to mind. He says, make sure the things you do keep us alive. The things you all have done, all of your achievements, all of your kindness, all of your spirit, all of your transcendent support of each other, all of your darn pranks. You have kept us more alive. And I think that's an essential function of community that we must keep in sight. Thank you, seniors, for teaching us that. Many of you have read or read from Annie Lamott's book on writing called Bird by Bird. It's a good one. One anecdote from that book that is on my mind is this one. Lamott says that she was with her best friend, Pammy, a young woman of 37 who was dying from cancer. She says, about a month before my friend Pammy died, she said something that may have permanently changed me. We had gone shopping for a dress for me to wear that night to a nightclub with the man I was seeing at the time. Pammy was in a wheelchair, wearing her Queen Mum wig, the easy rider look in her eyes. I tried on a lavender mini dress, which is not my usual style. I tend to wear big, baggy clothes. People used to tell me I dressed like John Goodman. Anyway, the dress fit perfectly. And I came out to model it for her. I stood there feeling very shy and very self-conscious and pleased. Then I said, do you think it makes my hips look too big? And she said to me so slowly, Annie, I really don't think you have that kind of time. Our dear hope for you graduates is that you have plenty of time. A great, gracious plenty of time. And our dear hope for you graduates is that you live as if you really don't have that kind of time.